It's kind of embarrassing that my YouTube videos has no view right now. But it's pretty interesting. I realized that people's style usually comes from telling and receiving people's stories. I usually tell people stories about my suffering and my rise. I think it's a very standard storyline in China to talk about yourself in terms of how you struggled in the past and how you emerge from that struggle. For example, my storyline emerged in China was that um, I mean like before I was mentally hospitalized. Before that, I was like in high school. I'm coming from a very less privileged inland city, so that kind of struggle and rise narrative forced me to actually structure my extracurricular activity in terms of I'm helping out the poor, helping out the inland resident by expanding their own worldview or by introducing debate topics to them. But unfortunately, it seems like they're actually the information bubble is actually not there. Like the inland cities are actually quite cut off in terms of information and accessing like the global society. But that was like later. But that's kind of like a narrative style. I'm kind of pushed to talk about my own stories. Um, so I just feel like in Chinese society, if you don't think about yourself or talk about yourself in terms of you're rising from a disprivileged, underprivileged community, then it's hard for society to recognize your success. Because usually there's narrative, counter narrative that people usually succeed with their background, with the help with others. So if you don't push yourself to like you're just rising from like a underprivileged background, then you will be illegitimate, delegitimized. I think there's a is a very sad social reality, but it's usually because of the fact that the society hasn't developed like a very effective social mechanism to deal with disagreement and class conflict, conflict of interests, etc. So people in general are just more prone to cynicism. So I just feel like in that society, like you should always sustain yourself with that kind of traumatic experience, traumatic narrative to be legitimized in a way that people's lives are full of trauma. Like trauma really holds a really like a very strong symbolic authority people over people's narrative and their how they structure their lives. Um, After high school, I just feel like the void of getting into a college, like that symbolic void. Once you get into a college, the dream of getting in a college is kind of like broke. Like it doesn't have any kind of authority over you, so now you're seeking new authority, and then new authority usually comes from another trauma, right? If you don't if you don't structure yourself with trauma, then you're problematic, because your people will think that you're privileged, and they try to bring you down. So another trauma will be like my parents bring me to mental hospital because of cultural shock or a lot of things are going on. Since I'm trying to align with U.S. institutions, and that create a lot of disturbances in my family and their relatives. So I got the situation got escalated. So they bring me to mental hospital, but this time it's really different because I was experiencing like a very intense restructuring of narrative. It's not just a matter of like a conventional traumatic narrative, like in Chinese common sense, like for example your parents are divorced or you're coming from like a rural background or you're you're like orphanaged, I don't know, or in certain way or you're bullied. Anyway, you're just rising from like a disprivileged, underprivileged or marginalized position, then you can legitimize yourself. But this time it's really different because different society like Chinese side and American side actually divide. They demand different narrative from me. In America, if you present yourself as really traumatized, then people are trying to help you or try to, like they're not gonna see you as a successful person. Um, I mean, if you carry the traumatic energy to the society, they're not gonna recognize you as like particularly like outstanding person. They just think that, oh, maybe you're still like not reliable. I don't know. Uh, so it's really different. So the gravity in terms of your trauma is really not valued in the U.S. So that demands me to create a really different narrative of myself and a really different personality. I just feel like a lot of people opt for an alternative narrative which is not trauma centered, but it's always a power center. Like you're trying to be strong, you're trying to be masculine, or trying to be the controller, manipulator of a lot of social events or mechanisms. I think that kind of mindset actually mirrored the popular urban myth about Illuminati, right? Illuminati seems like in Chinese popular myth or in popular imagination and conspiracy theory, those are really powerful people trying to control everything. And I think that kind of mirrors an authoritarian regime's manipulation of general population. They restrict the information access, and they try to divide society without like containing. I mean, they try to contain these political actions and social movements and voluntary organization, etc. Um, yeah, they're trying to project that kind of image onto themselves. Like they seem to have like really powerful and charismatic, and they try to manipulate people in terms of like imposing their own ideals. And um, I think that's another alternative to like trauma center narrative. And usually, I think usually in China it's like this too dominant narrative about yourself is so. I think it's the only two archetype. You cannot deviate from that. Um, but I think in the U.S. it's at least in the mainstream narrative, this two kind of narrative is not that it's not commonly accepted. Um, like conspiracy theories are usually like they're marginalized. Um, as for trauma based narrative, I think they're also marginalized in another way. Maybe like incel, maybe that kind of. So it's not the mainstream narrative. I feel like in the U.S. mainstream narrative usually promotes either as conservative or as a liberal. So it's more about your attitude toward the social structure and how your personal experience that actually structure your political opinion. So if you're a more conservative person, like more leaning to um, traditional religion, history, family, community, maybe you're saying, oh, you'll structure your personal narrative as, oh, maybe I'm coming from a really traditional background, or I witness people who are happy are actually living within this framework. Um, the alternative would be more liberal. So liberal narrative would be like I'm coming from a very conservative background, but I found it really problematic. Or like either way, the point is to prove that to position yourself within the social norm, and the norm is more like it's less divisive. I think it's more or less like a general. It's more mild. It's more moderate. I don't know how to describe it, but I think in either way, there isn't like a very strong emphasis on trauma. So yeah, I think that's one of my reflection of U.S. social norm by comparing it to the Chinese social norm. And that's really revealing because in high school I wasn't trying to think about myself in terms of I indeed like talked about myself in terms of liberal or conservative narrative, but I don't really like this kind of narrative just restricted to the international student community, but you know that that kind of social group isn't representative. I mean, this kind of narrative just like a elitist decoration of their identity. They're not actually liberal or they're not actually conservative. When they are go to U.S. college, they just switch to um, earning money and go school style, which is pretty much like a traditional Chinese model of success. So, so I think it's pretty interesting to think about how you learn the things from school, how you practice the knowledge in school, and how you internalize that logic into your daily life and embodied experience. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. Like it's a very interesting perspective to think about how you and your narrative fit into the social structure and how the social structure your experience. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.